The rain-slicked streets of Chicago glistened under the sodium glow of streetlights. And I was late again. My phone buzzed with notifications, each one a reminder of the life I was failing to hold together. But when I slid into the back of that Uber, something shifted, like the air before a storm. I was 28, drowning in deadlines and a breakup that still stung like a fresh wound. My name's Ethan Carter, a graphic designer who thought he had it all figured out until his fiancée, Mark, walked out 6 months ago, leaving nothing but a note and half a closet of empty hangers. The city felt colder since then, and I'd buried myself in work to avoid the ache. Tonight, I was headed to a client meeting I couldn't afford to miss. But my mind was elsewhere, replaying Mark's laugh, his touch, the way he'd made me feel like I was enough. The driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror, his eyes catching mine for a split second. "Rough night?" he asked, his voice low, almost gravelly, but warm, like he actually cared. I nodded, forcing a smile, and looked out the window at the blur of lights. His name was Luca, according to the app. Luca Moretti, 29, 5 stars, and a photo that didn't do justice to the man in front of me. Dark hair, a jawline that could cut glass, and a quiet intensity that made the small space of the car feel alive. "Mind if I play some music?" Luca asked, his fingers hovering over his phone. I shrugged, expecting some generic pop playlist. But instead, the soft strum of an acoustic guitar filled the car, a song I hadn't heard in years. One Mark and I used to play on lazy Sundays. I froze, my chest tightening. "You okay back there?" Luca's voice pulled me back, and I realized I'd been staring at him. "Yeah, just that song," I muttered, my voice barely audible. "It's got history." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. "Music does that. Sneaks up on you." He didn't change the song, though, and I was grateful. We drove in silence for a while, the city's chaos muted by the rain and the melody. I studied him discreetly, the way his hands gripped the wheel, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way he seemed at ease in a world that felt so heavy to me. Then, out of nowhere, Luca did something I didn't expect. He pulled over, not at my destination, but at a quiet street corner by the river. The car idled, and he turned to face me, his expression unreadable. "I need to show you something," he said, his voice steady but laced with something urgent. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the sudden weight of the moment. What was this? A confession? A warning? I couldn't look away from his eyes, deep and searching, like they held a secret I was meant to know. He reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "This isn't about the ride," he said, flipping it open. "But I think you need to see it." My pulse pounded as he handed it to me. The pages filled with handwritten words, poetry. Maybe. Or letters. I didn't know then that those pages would unravel both our lives. The notebook was heavier than it looked, its edges frayed from being carried too long. The first page had a single line in bold. Messy script, for the ones who feel too much. I glanced at Luca, who was watching me with an intensity that made my skin prickle. "Read it," he said softly. "Just one page." I hesitated, then turned to a random entry. The words were raw, unguarded, a letter to someone named Alex, filled with longing and regret. "I never told you I loved you." Not out loud. I was scared. "And now you're gone. And I'm still here, driving strangers around, trying to outrun the silence." My throat tightened. The words felt like they were written for me. For Mark. For every moment I'd let slip away. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, my voice cracking. Luca leaned back, exhaling. "Because you look like you needed it. Like you're carrying something you don't talk about." He paused, his eyes softening. "I know what that's like. I didn't know what to say. The car felt smaller. The air thicker. I wanted to ask about Alex. About the pain in those words. But something stopped me. Instead, I handed the notebook back, my fingers brushing his for a moment. The contact sent a jolt through me. Unexpected and electric. We should get going, I said, though part of me didn't want to move. Luca nodded. But before he started the car, he looked at me again. Keep the notebook, he said. Just for tonight. Maybe it'll help. I clutched it as we drove on, the city lights blurring past. I didn't know then that this ride was only the beginning. That Luca's words would pull me into a story I couldn't escape, a story of love, loss, and the courage to start again. The rain had stopped, but the air in Luca's car felt heavy with something unspoken. I held the notebook, its weight grounding me as we wove through Chicago's late-night traffic. Every few minutes, I stole a glance at Luca, trying to piece together the man behind the words I'd read. His profile was sharp against the glow of passing headlights, and I wondered about Alex, who he was, what he'd meant to Luca. The letter I'd read wasn't just a confession. It was a wound, still raw, and Luca had trusted me with it. Why? I was just a stranger, another fare on his app. But the way he'd looked at me, like he saw through the walls I'd built, made me feel exposed in a way I hadn't since Mark left. You're quiet back there, Lucas said, breaking the silence. His voice was gentle, but there was an edge to it, like he was testing the waters. I cleared my throat. Just processing. That letter, it's heavy. I tapped the notebook, unsure how to ask the questions burning in my mind. Who's Alex? Luca's hands tightened on the wheel, and for a moment, I thought he wouldn't answer. Then he sighed, a sound that carried years of weight. Alex was everything. My best friend. My first love. We were kids when we met. Barely 18. Figuring ourselves out in a small town that didn't make it easy. He paused, his eyes fixed on the road. He died 3 years ago. Car accident. The words hit like a punch. I wanted to say something. Anything. But my tongue felt glued to the roof of my mouth. I'm sorry. I finally managed. The words feeble against his grief. Luca shrugged. But it wasn't dismissive, it was resignation. It's why I drive at night. Keeps me moving. Keeps the quiet from getting too loud. He glanced at me through the mirror, his eyes catching mine again. What about you? What's got you so lost? I wasn't ready for that. My instinct was to deflect, to hide behind a joke or a vague excuse. But something about Luca's honesty made it impossible. My fiancé left me, I said, the words spilling out before I could stop them. 6 months ago. I thought we were building a life. But he didn't want it. Not with me. Luca nodded, like he'd expected it. That's why that song hit you so hard. Yeah. I looked down at the notebook, tracing its edges. I keep thinking I should be over it by now. But it's like, part of me is still waiting for him to come back. He didn't respond right away, and the silence wasn't uncomfortable, it was shared. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. You don't get over it. You just learn to carry it differently. We pulled up to my destination, a sleek office building where my client was probably already annoyed at my tardiness. But I didn't move. The notebook felt like an anchor, tethering me to this moment. To Luca. Why'd you give me this? I asked again, holding it up. You don't even know me. He turned to face me, his expression unguarded for the first time. I saw you, Ethan. The way you looked when you got in, like you're carrying a ghost. I've been there. I thought maybe reading it would make you feel less alone. My chest ached at his words. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, that I was fine. But the truth was, I hadn't felt seen in months. Not since Mark. And now this stranger. This Uber driver had cracked open something I'd kept locked away. "Keep it for tonight," Lucas said, nodding at the notebook. "Read another page if you want. Or don't. Just don't let it sit in your glove compartment. Okay." I laughed. A small, broken sound. "Deal." I stepped out of the car, the notebook clutched to my chest, and watched as Luca drove off, his taillights fading into the city's pulse. The meeting went by in a blur. Charts, pitches, handshakes, but my mind was elsewhere, tangled in Luca's words, in the weight of his grief and mine. That night, alone in my apartment, I opened the notebook again. The pages were a mix of letters, poems, and fragments of thoughts, all written in Luca's jagged handwriting. One entry caught my eye. "Dated a year ago, I keep driving, hoping I'll find you in the next passenger. But it's never you. I'm sorry I didn't say it when it mattered." I closed the notebook, my heart racing. I didn't know Luca. Not really. But I felt his pain, his hope, his refusal to let go. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel so alone. The next morning, I woke with Luca's notebook on my nightstand, its presence both comforting and unsettling. I hadn't slept well. My dreams a mess of Mark's face and Luca's voice, blending into something I couldn't untangle. I had to return the notebook, but the thought of seeing Luca again made my stomach twist with nerves. I opened the app, requested a ride, and held my breath when Luca's name popped up. 15 minutes later, he pulled up outside my apartment, his car a familiar haven in the gray Chicago morning. I slid into the back seat, the notebook in my hands, and met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "You again," he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "Yeah, me again." I held up the notebook. "Figured you'd want this back." He shook his head. "Keep it a little longer. You read any more?" I nodded, unsure how to explain the way his words had burrowed into me. "It's a lot. You're writing it's like you're talking to him, but also to yourself." Luca's smile faded, but his eyes stayed warm. "That's exactly it. Writing's the only way I can still talk to Alex. Keeps him close." He started driving, his hands steady on the wheel. "What about you? You write?" I laughed, a little embarrassed. "Not like that. I doodle, design stuff. My art's more visual." "Art's art," he said simply. "It's all just trying to say something you can out loud." We drove in silence for a while, the city waking up around us. I was supposed to be heading to a coffee shop to work, but I didn't care about the destination. I cared about Luca, about the way he made me feel like my pain wasn't something to hide. "Can I ask you something?" I said, my voice quieter than I meant. "Shoot." "How do you do it? Keep going. I mean, after losing him." Luca's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away from the road. "You don't have a choice. At first, it's just surviving, breathing, eating, driving. Then one day, you notice the sun's out, or someone makes you laugh, and you realize you're still here. It doesn't fix anything, but it's enough to keep you moving." His words hit me harder than I expected. I'd been stuck in that first stage, surviving. Barely. Mark wasn't dead, but he was gone, and the hole he left felt just as final. "I don't know if I'm there yet," I admitted. "The moving on part." "You will be," Lucas said, his voice firm. "You're stronger than you think, Ethan." The way he said my name sent a shiver through me. It wasn't just kindness, it was belief. Like he saw something in me I couldn't. We pulled up to the coffee shop, but I didn't want to get out. "Can I call you again? For a ride? I mean," I added quickly, my face heating up. Luca grinned. "A real one this time." "Anytime. You've got my number." He tapped the app on his phone, but it felt like he meant something more. Over the next week, I found excuses to book rides with Luca. A trip to the grocery store, a late-night run to the office, any reason to slide into his car and feel that strange, quiet connection. Each time, we talked a little more. He told me about growing up in a small Illinois town, coming out to his parents, the way Alex had been his anchor through it all. I told him about Mark, about the plans we'd made, the way I'd blamed myself when they fell apart. One night, Luca pulled over again, this time at a park overlooking Lake Michigan. The water was dark, reflecting the city's lights like scattered stars. He turned off the engine and handed me the notebook. "Write something," he said. "Just one line. For you, not anyone else." I hesitated, then took the pen he offered. My hand shook as I wrote, "I'm still here, even if I'm broken." I showed it to him, and he nodded, like it was enough. "That's a start," he said, and in that moment, I believed him. The notebook became a ritual. Every ride with Luca, I'd write a line or two, and he'd read them, sometimes adding his own. It was like we were building something together, a fragile bridge between our broken pieces. But the more we talked, the more I felt something shift, a pull I hadn't felt since Mark. Maybe ever. One evening, Luca picked me up after a brutal day at work. My latest project had tanked, and my boss's email was a masterclass in passive-aggressive disappointment. I slid into the back seat, exhausted, and Luca took one look at me. "Rough one, huh?" "You have no idea," I muttered, rubbing my temples. "Feel like I'm failing at everything." He didn't respond right away, just drove, the city's rhythm syncing with the soft indie playlist he'd chosen. Then he said, "You're not failing. You're showing up. That's more than most people do." I wanted to argue, to tell him he was wrong, but his words settled into me like a warm blanket. "You always know what to say," I said, half joking. "What's your secret?" Luca chuckled. A low, rumbling sound. "No secret. I just say what I wish someone had said to me." We ended up at a diner, not because I'd planned it, but because Luca suggested it, and I didn't want the ride to end. The place was a relic: neon signs, checkered floors, the smell of coffee and grease. We sat in a booth, the notebook between us, and talked for hours. He told me about Alex's laugh, how it could light up a room, and I told him about Mark's sketches, how he'd doodle on napkins when we went out. "You still love him?" Luca said. Not a question. I stared at my coffee, the steam curling up like a ghost. "I don't know. I think I love who we were. But that's gone." Luca nodded, his eyes steady. "You can't go back. But you can build something new." I looked at him, really looked, and saw the man who'd been carrying his own grief for years, yet still found space to carry mine. My hand twitched, wanting to reach for his, but I stopped myself. What was I doing? He was my Uber driver, not my therapist, not my anything. But the way he looked at me, like he saw every crack and still stayed, made me wonder. That night, I wrote in the notebook, "I'm scared to want something new. But I do." Luca read it and didn't say anything, just handed it back with a small, knowing smile. I didn't know then that he was starting to feel it too, the pull, the possibility, the risk. The next ride, Luca was quieter, his usual ease replaced by something heavier. "I read your last entry," he said finally, pulling over near the river again. "You meant it, didn't you?" My heart pounded. "Yeah, I did." He turned to face me, his eyes searching mine. "Ethan, I don't know if I'm ready for whatever this is, but I haven't felt this alive since Alex. And that scares the hell out of me." The air between us crackled, and for a moment, I thought he might lean closer. But he didn't. He started the car, and we drove in silence, the notebook burning a hole in my lap. I wanted to say something, to tell him I was scared too, but the words wouldn't come. The tension between us grew with every ride. It wasn't just the notebook, Anna Maria, it was the way Luca's hand lingered when he passed me a coffee. The way his laugh made my chest ache. I was falling for him, and it terrified me. I'd built walls after Mark, convinced I'd never let anyone in again. But Luca was dismantling them, one ride at a time. One night, he picked me up from a bar where I'd gone to drown my nerves. I'd had one too many drinks, and when I slid into the car, I was looser, bolder. You ever think about kissing a passenger? I blurted, then immediately regretted it. Luca's eyes widened, but he didn't laugh. Only one, he said, his voice low, and my heart stopped. He didn't elaborate, just drove. But the air was electric, charged with what we weren't saying. At a red light, I leaned forward, the alcohol making me reckless. Was it me? He turned, his face inches from mine, and for a moment, I thought he'd close the gap. But he pulled back, his expression torn. Ethan, you're drunk. And I'm not. I can't. I slumped back, embarrassed but not surprised. Right. Sorry. Don't be, he said quickly. It's not that I don't want to. It's just complicated. I nodded, the rejection stinging less than I expected. Because it wasn't rejection, not really. It was fear, and I knew it well. We didn't talk about it again that night. But I wrote in the notebook, I want you. And I'm not sorry. The next ride, Luca was different, more open, but still guarded. He told me about his dreams, how he'd wanted to be a writer before Alex's death derailed him. I told him about my art, how I'd stopped drawing for myself after Mark left. We were sharing pieces of ourselves, and it felt like a dance, each step closer to something neither of us could name. Then came the night that changed everything. Luca picked me up from my apartment, and instead of driving, he parked at a quiet overlook. The city sparkled below, and he turned to me, his eyes fierce. I read what you wrote, he said, and I'm scared, Ethan, but I'm tired of being scared. Before I could respond, he leaned across the console and kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, then deeper, like he was pouring everything into Itha's grief, his hope, his heart. I kissed him back, my hands finding his face, and for the first time in months, I felt alive. When we pulled apart, breathless, he laughed a real, unguarded laugh. I didn't plan that, he said. Good, I said, grinning. Plans suck. We sat there, the notebook forgotten, and talked until dawn. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a beginning. Fragile and new, but real. The kiss changed everything, but it didn't make things easier. Luca and I were navigating uncharted territory, both of us carrying ghosts we couldn't outrun. Every ride felt like a stolen moment, a chance to explore what we could be. But the weight of our pasts lingered. One night, Luca told me about the accident. He'd been driving, Alex in the passenger seat, when a truck ran a red light. I keep thinking if I'd turned left instead of right, he'd still be here, he said, his voice breaking. I reached for his hand, and he let me hold it, his fingers trembling. You couldn't have known, I said, but I knew the words were hollow. Guilt doesn't listen to reason. He nodded, but his eyes were distant. I know, but it doesn't stop the what-ifs. I told him about Mark's note, the one I'd memorized. I'm not ready for forever. I'm sorry. I'd spent months blaming myself, wondering what I'd done wrong. Luca listened, his thumb brushing over my knuckles, and said, You didn't fail him, Ethan. Sometimes people just leave. We were healing each other. Slowly. But the fear was still there. What if this was too much? Too soon? What if we were just two broken people clinging to each other to stay afloat? One evening, Luca showed up with a Surprizia sketchbook. Not the notebook. You said you stopped drawing. He said, maybe it's time to start again. I laughed. Touched, but nervous. What? You're my art therapist now. He grinned. Maybe. Draw something for me. That night, I sketched him his profile against the city lights. The scar above his eyebrow. The quiet strength in his eyes. When I showed it to him, he stared at it for a long time. Then said, "This is how you see me." "Yeah," I said, my voice soft. "This is you." He kissed me again. Slower this time. And I felt the walls I'd built start to crumble. But the next ride, he was quiet. Distant. "I'm scared I'm using you," he admitted. To fill the hole Alex left. The words hurt. But I understood. "I'm scared too," I said. "But I'd rather be scared with you than alone." He didn't respond. But he didn't pull away either. We were teetering on the edge of something real. And neither of us knew if we'd fall or fly. Weeks turned into months. And Luca and I became something more than driver and passenger. We'd meet outside of Ride's coffee shops. Late-night walks. Quiet moments by the lake. The notebook and sketchbook were our shared language, filled with words and drawings that said what we couldn't. But the past wasn't done with us. One night, I got a text from Mark. "I miss you. Can we talk?" It was like a bomb going off in my chest. I didn't tell Luca at first, but he knew something was wrong when I got in his car the next day. "You're off," he said, his eyes narrowing. "What's going on?" I showed him the text, and his face tightened. "What do you want to do?" he asked, his voice careful. "I don't know," I admitted. I thought I was done with him. But it's complicated. Luca nodded, but I saw the hurt in his eyes. "You need to figure it out, Ethan. For you, not for him." I met Mark at a cafe, and it was like stepping into a memory. He looked the same, but different, older. Maybe. Or just tired. He apologized. Said he'd panicked. That he wanted to try again. But as I listened, I realized I didn't want the life we'd had. I wanted the life I was building with Luca. Fragile as it was. I told Mark no. And it felt like letting go of a weight I'd carried too long. When I told Luca, he didn't say anything at first. Just pulled me into a hug. "I'm proud of you," he whispered. And I felt the truth of it. But Luca's own ghosts were harder to shake. He started pulling back. Canceling rides. Taking longer to respond. One night, he admitted why. "It's Alex's birthday tomorrow," he said. "I don't know how to do thesis without feeling like I'm betraying him." I took his hand, my heart aching. "You're not betraying him. You're living." He'd want that, wouldn't he? Luca's eyes glistened, but he nodded. Yeah, he would. We spent that night together, not as driver and passenger, but as two people choosing each other. Despite the pain, despite the fear. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. A year after that first ride, Luca and I were still figuring it out. We weren't perfect, we fought. We doubted. We carried our scars, but we were together. The notebook and sketchbook were full now. A testament to our journey. And we'd started a new one. Together. One night, Luca took me to the spot where he'd first shown me the notebook. By the river. The city was alive around us. But it felt like we were the only two people in the world. He pulled out a new notebook. This one blank. And handed it to me. Write something, he said. His voice soft, but sure. I opened it and wrote, "We're broken. But we're enough. Luca read it and smiled, his eyes bright with something new hope. Maybe. Or love. Yeah, he said. We are. He kissed me, and it felt like a promise. Not to fix each other, but to keep showing up, to keep writing our story, one page at a time. The city hummed around us, and for the first time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was running toward him, toward us. We didn't know what the future held, but we knew we'd face it together. And that was enough.